Now, this syllabus that we're working with from, well, we would have worked with it last year a little bit, but this syllabus is a little bit different from prior versions, right? It's not completely different. It's, I think, a lot, but the structure is much improved so that a lot of the stuff you would have to do for your SBA and paper 3, it's kind of incorporated into the syllabus instead of placed at the end. And a lot of the things that used to be options are worked into the body of the syllabus now. So that's good. Right? So as soon as you get your topics for the term, perhaps you may have already, you could let me know. And I would be happy to try and include them, right? All right, so today's topic is culture. That's objectives 11, 12, 13 on the syllabus, right? So we want to try and get through the whole thing today. It does a little ambitious, but we could try, right? And if we don't finish today, we will finish it next week. Okay? Once we get through this topic, we'll go back to the beginning in family. All right, so we'll start back with families from next week if everything goes according to plan. Right, now I chose culture part because we did pizza family over summer, so I didn't want to just restart that if you were with us over summer and then have it be repetitive and boring. And then also because culture is something, whether or not you realize it, you already know a lot about because you live in the Caribbean, so you're familiar with the culture, right? All right, so let's get started. We have a little game along the way. Choose a treasure chest, and you'll take coins from the treasure chest to make wishes if you choose to, right? So depending on, pretend each one is a million. So the first one, each coin represents a million. So if you chose the first one, you got 1 million. The second or third one, you got 2 million. So you won't run out of coins, don't worry, to make wishes if you choose to, right? All right, so first question. What is culture? When you hear the word culture, what do you think of? When you hear the word tradition, what do you think of? You can put your answer in the chat. What does the word culture mean to you? How do we do things differently here in the Caribbean than we would in another country, say England or the US or Spain? Now, there's no wrong answer. You're not going to get in trouble if you say an answer that I disagree with. And as far as you can, please put your first and last name. I think most of you have it, thank you. But everybody else, it's just a handful, like 4 or 5 of you. If you put your last name, you can't change name, just message me in the chat and let me know what it is, right? All right. So we say that culture is the set of the ideas we have, the customs we have, the social behaviors we have, as a particular people or a particular society, right? Yes, and traditions, Letitia is saying things and events that are passed down from generation to generation, right? All right, so please take down the definition. And you'll be able to say it, right? So please note this. Right. I saw a joke, a comedian made up a joke, and she was saying that she came back, a Trinidadian, right? A woman, and so she returns from the US and she messages her friend and she tells her, hey, I'm here, I just arrived. there were many delays, but I'm here now and I'm tired, but I'm here. And the friend replies, good morning. Can't remember the comedian's name. And then next day, she is supposed to meet the friend somewhere, and she goes there, and she messages the friend, hey, I'm at this store, I'm outside the store, where are you? And the friend replies, good morning. And she says she's convinced that she could be in Port of Spain on Charlotte Street, and she could fall and break her hip, and she could message her friend and say, there's no space in the hospital, there are no doctors, I've broken my hip, I don't know what to do. And the friend would reply, good morning. Why is that? What does that say about our culture? She's highlighting the fact that there's this cultural practice in the Caribbean where we believe that we need to start with a greeting, whatever we're saying, right? If you go into a public office to speak to a clerk, to ask a question, and you start with good morning. You join the doubles line, you say good morning, even though they're strangers and you may never see them again. You walk into a store, you pass the security guard, you say good morning, or afternoon or evening, right? So that's an example of a cultural practice, an idea that we have that manners, that if you say good morning, that shows you have good manners, and good manners are important. A custom that we have, we start everything with good morning or good afternoon or good evening. And social behavior, we perform the greeting, we say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And if people don't, we call them out on it. We say, where your manners? Your mother didn't teach you to say good morning. Or we respond, if they didn't tell us good morning, we say good morning, and we pause for them to say it, right? Is that fair? Do you all have this experience as you move through the world? One other thing I would ask you to add here is that culture, you can add it wherever you have space on the page, right? Culture is tangible, meaning you could touch it. Right? So for example, anything that is particular to the society that you are in that you can touch. So particular foods, right? National dishes, particular clothes, carnival costumes, the colors that we wear, right? And it is non-tangible. So you cannot touch it. That's the part of the culture that's made up of ideas, such as the idea that we should say good morning first before we try to conduct any business, right? So culture is both something you could touch and something you cannot touch. So ideas, customs, well, some of the things involved in the custom you could touch. A white dress, that's a wedding dress, you could touch it. The cup for communion, you could touch it. The Bibles in the church, you could touch them. The shoes that you remove when you go into temple or to mosque, that's a practice. But the carpet that might be on the floor, you could touch, right? So some parts you could touch and some parts you cannot touch, right? I want to change the slide in 10 seconds. If you need more time, you'll tell me, right? All right, no, it's not that defining culture is on the syllabus per se, but it's that we can't talk about the thing culture unless we have the same understanding of what we're talking about, right? All right, let's continue then. Okay, tell me, to what extent are these examples of Caribbean culture? So are school uniforms an example of Caribbean culture? Would you say yes or no? There are 15 of us here. Well, 14, because I'm only 15, right? So I could get 14 answers. And that's a manageable number to check. So you could tell me. Yes, I would say school uniforms are part of Caribbean culture too. because most of us in secondary school and primary school and even preschool have to wear a school uniform, as opposed to other countries where that is not mandatory. That's not a general norm. What about Ramadan? Is that part of Caribbean culture? Or is that only in foreign countries? Right? It's definitely part of some. Once there are Muslims living in the country, then Ramadan is a part of that country's culture, right? Even if people, if not everyone is observing it, then people are aware of it, and um, it affects their day-to-day life, right? All right, what about gyms? Do we have a gym culture in the Caribbean? This one we're not sure about, huh? Yeah, so we have a lot of gyms probably in the Caribbean. But is that a defining characteristic of Caribbean people? Like most Caribbean people go to the gym? Some people said yes, but now they're changing their answer. Do you think it's becoming more and more a part of Caribbean culture? So like 10 years ago, there might have been way fewer gyms than there are now. But now there are more gyms and more people go to the gym and older people also go to the gym. Right. Okay. So culture could change, right? This example shows us that culture could change. Things don't always remain the same. I mean, in the future, sometime we could do away with uniforms. What about this character from folklore, Old Hig? Who has heard of an Old Hig before? Now, some of us know it by another name. What do you make of this picture? Somebody is a ball of flame. So Olhig is one name for it, and Sukuya is another name for it. You know, Sue has a story with these characters in them, and I was looking to put it in the PowerPoint today, but it was so depressing. But I'll probably put it in the PowerPoint for us tomorrow, next week. So Olhig, yes, and Sukuya's yes. Right. Good. Okay. What about, would you say vampires are a part of Caribbean culture? No, right. That's like a foreign. Now, even though the Sukuya is kind of a vampire, we wouldn't say the character of a vampire. The idea of a vampire is part of our culture. That's not our version of it, right? All right. What about Nicki Minaj and Taylor Swift? Are they part of Caribbean culture? Nicki, yes. Kind of. Okay, good answer. Kind of, because in a lot of her songs she references the Caribbean and Trinidad, but a lot of her music doesn't, I mean, it doesn't reflect a Caribbean experience necessarily. It might reflect more of a foreign or American. But yes, for Nicki, right? What about Taylor Swift? Is there a population within the Caribbean? I don't know because I'm not surrounded by teen girls, so I don't know. But like young women and teen girls, are they fans of Taylor Swift? What about if I had put K-pop or K-dramas as the other option? I didn't think of it, but let's pretend I put K-pop. Do these have a large following in the Caribbean? Okay, so even though the thing comes from outside the region, right? If there is a large enough following, like for K-pop and K-dramas, we could consider it part of like a subculture, we might call it, right? And even Taylor Swift, even if, like, let's say if you take a secondary school population, and you tell me that 90% of the people who go there are into K-pops and K-dramas. And if you tell me 5% of the people that go there are into Taylor Swift, they listen to Taylor Swift and they look forward to her new releases, blah, blah, blah. Well, both of those are part of the culture. It's just that Taylor Swift might be a smaller part, and K-pop and K-dramas are also a small part because it's not widespread. It's not the whole population that's aware of it. Old people are definitely not. Right? So culture must exist within a group, but it doesn't have to be the whole group in the country, right? Like how everybody's aware that most students wear school uniforms, or students wear school uniforms in the Caribbean, most, right? Not everybody may be aware of these artists or these cultural products, but that doesn't mean it's not part of the culture. It's just a smaller part. All right, moving on. So nothing really here to write. Now I have some things we could write. So examples of culture and cultural forms. Now you are welcome to shorten the note. It's just about capturing the idea of the example, right? So we're writing notes here. All right, so customs and ceremonies that take place in the Caribbean. And these are just two examples. There are others that you could think up and put down if you prefer, right? All right, so I have as the first one, it's a fairly common practice in the Caribbean for a lot of weddings to have two ceremonies. So they have a traditional religious one where the bride might be dressed in some type of traditional or religious attire. So it could be traditional clothes from India, traditional Hindu clothes, traditional Islamic clothes, traditional African wear, and then the bride will also get married in a white dress in a separate ceremony, right? Or you could think of this the other way. The bride might have the religious part in the white dress, and then they might have a second part in a different style of dress. Right? So the weddings sort of have two ceremonies. They might get married in a courthouse, that's one sort of ceremony, and then they might have a religious ceremony after. Right? So the idea of two ceremonies for a wedding. What else can we think of? Parang during the Christmas season, when there's a custom of paranderos going, so a group of people playing parang, right? Going from house to house. And sometimes a version of this is Christmas carols, right? And if these traditions don't resonate with you, you could suggest others, right? But so the heading is examples of culture / cultural forms, and I'm asking you to take notes, right? Cultural forms, cultural practices. Other examples, what do y'all cook for Christmas Day? Do you celebrate Christmas? I should have started with that question. If you celebrate Christmas, what do you cook for Christmas Day? Nowadays, even people who are not Christian celebrate Christmas because kids have gotten a hold of the idea of, hey, I can get presents at Christmas time. So if so, what is special about the menu for Christmas Day in your family? Right, in some homes it's ham. In other homes it's turkey because they don't eat ham. In some homes it might be a chicken ham. In some homes they might have pastas for breakfast, or it could be hops and ham. Right? Or other things, it's nothing is set in stone. To me, once we reach September, it's Christmas season. Because in our family, there are two birthdays, one at the end of September and one the first week of October, and then there's Diwali, and then there's Christmas. So to me, it's Christmas season. Right, you have friends over for lunch, or you have to go by family, or family comes by black cake. That's another one, yes. That's another big tradition for Christmas, right? All right, what else do we have here? So customs and ceremonies is the big one, the big cultural form that is an example of culture. Another example of culture has to do with arts and craft. So when we look at the arts and craft that are around, we see examples of national and Caribbean culture, right? So if you think of if you ever walk by a store in the mall or any other place, like thinking downstairs by Massey in that place in that thing in Trinity, I forget what the little mall is called, but there's a little store that sells national souvenirs, like a souvenir store, right? So you'll see little pottery, you'll see dolls wearing dresses that have the colors or the styles of um, the Caribbean or the flag colors. You'll see carnival costume is another example of arts and craft as a cultural form. Tie-dye, batik, those are regional cultural forms as well. Shack, yeah. Or we call them maracas sometimes, right? Things you shake, not a beach, right? But I want to say this is CH, yeah, but I could be wrong. Um, so maracas, shack. Nowadays I see a lot of little steel pans, like souvenir size steel pans. Jewelry, there's always a lot of jewelry. Like sometimes you could get your name on a bracelet, but the beads are national colors also. Um, yeah, t-shirts, bags, probably keychains too. You know. So arts and crafts is another one. Another one is language. The Caribbean has very distinctive and very unique forms of English that it uses, right? Even though each island might be different, um, the there are similar patterns from island to island, right? All right, so Creole languages meaning unique versions of English that developed in the Caribbean, right? When we use the word Creole in this context of social studies and studying culture, we mean things that were developed in the Caribbean region. Right, so we have our own version of grammar sometimes. We have our own special words that we've added to the language that wouldn't exist in another English speaking country necessarily, right? We have our own patois and dialects, right? So I'm going to say from other European languages. But it's not just European, it could be indigenous languages too, right? So some countries have a French Creole, meaning a version of French. Yeah, and we've incorporated words from other languages. Most Englishes have at this point. Okay, number 4. What do we have as number 4? Another cultural form, cultural form, music and dance. So that's a big one for the Caribbean. So reggae, dancehall, soca, calypso, and there are others, right? These are musical forms with musical beats and lyrics and styles that evolved in the region. We have our own version of jazz. We have other musical versions as well, right? If you could think of any, you could tell me. What else? Religions and festivals that we have in the Caribbean that exist that began in the Caribbean. So the spiritual Baptist, for instance, is a religion that began in the Caribbean. It didn't start somewhere else and come here, right? Voodoo, and then of course Caribbean visions of all the so-called traditional religions like Christianity, Hinduism, and Islam. While we might follow the major tenets of the original visions, we've added our own in the Caribbean. And sometimes we don't even realize it, right? Last year, I think it was last year, my stepmom passed away, and she was Presbyterian Christian. And there's a custom to observe after 40 nights, 40 nights after death, or 40 days after death, 40 nights after death. You have a special prayer or a special service or a special observance just to remember the person who passed, right? And so my niece asked the pastor if he could talk about what is the origin of that 40-day observance. And he said something interesting that we would not expected. And if you know a different reason, you could say it. I'm not saying he's the sole authority. I'm not saying, but this is what he said. It was interesting for our class. He said that a lot of Presbyterians converted from other religions initially. This is what, 100 years ago or something, right? And so after their loved one passed away, they said, all these other religions do something on the 40th night to observe or remember the departed person. And as a result of that, so in the other religions, that 40-day observance, right? The pastor is saying Presbyterians incorporated it into the religion as a way of providing comfort or additional connection with the person who had passed, right? But that's an example of how we take the religion, or we meet the religion meets us, and then we add things or we change things a bit and make it a kind of a unique version. Right? So all of these examples are examples that illustrate our Caribbean culture. So the examples of the culture, the cultural forms, the cultural practices on this page, we're saying evolved in the Caribbean, came into existence in the Caribbean, were born in the Caribbean, right? Now, I'm not saying pottery was born in the Caribbean, right? But certain styles, designs, that's what we're saying. Originated in the Caribbean, right? Certain versions of carnival costumes originated in the Caribbean. Carnival practices too, certain versions of carnival practices. The ones that we have are ours. We didn't see Brazil had a carnival and we said, oh, let's also have a carnival. It came out of practices here. All right, enough of me talking. If you all have questions, let me know. I'm going to give us a minute with this slide. And then we have to move to another one, right? Right, guys, actually one more to add here. I'm looking back at the list now. There's one more to add. So I'm going to put 6 up here because that's where I have space. And that is folklore. Right? Now, y'all are familiar from movies, from reading, from sometimes you have to read these stories in school with characters like Hercules or Zeus or Perseus, because they come from Greek mythology, which spread over the world, but that's the folklore that the Greek have, right? We have our own version of stories like that. What do we have? We have characters like Olhig and Isukunya, right? So I'm just going to put some examples, and you could also put examples that if you prefer instead of these, right? So in some countries she's Olhig, and in some countries she's a Sukuya, a woman who transforms into a ball of flame, and sucks the blood of babies. And the way to stop her is to catch her while her skin is in the house and she's off flying, and put salt and pepper on the skin, right? We have, who else do we have? Papa Bois. I saw there's Lagahu, which sometimes is spelled like this, Lugaru, right? And sometimes it's spelled like this, depending on where you are, Lagahu. And there are many others. Yes, there's Dwen, which I find particularly creepy, that idea of Dwen. Yeah. Right. So just take down a couple examples, add to them if you would like. Half a minute again. Okay. When you hear the term cultural diversity, what do you think of? We are probably used to hearing the Caribbean region talked about as a culturally diverse place, right? So diversity is a fancy word for difference. Like when you go to the mall and you go to the food court, you want some diversity in your choices. You don't want everybody to have the same thing, because then what is the point of so many places selling the same thing with the same for the same price, right? So diversity means different. So we are a place where we have a lot of different cultures, right? So please take down the definition or a version of the definition. The presence of many different cultures and cultural background, cultural practices within the region. Right? So the Caribbean is a culturally diverse region because it has so many different cultures and so many different cultural practices. If you think of Christianity, some people worship on a Saturday, some people worship on a Sunday, some people worship in the morning, some people have 3 services a day that they could choose from. Some people have certain rituals they could do in church while others don't perform those rituals. Some people's pastors dress in ceremonial robes, other people's pastors wear a particular color, some people's pastors just wear normal formal clothes, right? As opposed to a version in a country where all the pastors dress the same and it's one version of the religion and everybody goes to church the same time and the same day, right? All right, so everybody has their definition noted. Okay, it's this genie again. Who wants to make a wish? Anybody? Wow, this is the wish he granted. If you did make a wish, you were shrunk to the size of a bug. And he recommends that you run because those bugs are coming to get you. That's terrible. Yeah, this genie might be a psychopath. All right. Now this slide and the next few slides are for discussion, right? And then we'll write to the end. So first of all, where does the cultural diversity in the Caribbean come from? Where does it come from? And I have some ships here with some pictures to help us think of where it came from. So where does it come from? We have the picture to the left is supposed to represent indigenous people, a bit stereotypical, but that was the best I could find. Then we have this person here with this red coat and this European style dress. Who is he? And then we have some countries on the map. So where does diversity come from? Why is the Caribbean region so diverse? What can you tell me? No? All right, so we have indigenous populations. We have Christopher Columbus bringing Europe across the Caribbean. We have Africa. We have, well, this is Europe, and we have India, right? Okay, so let's look at, right. So here is where we're taking notes, right? Where does the cultural diversity in the Caribbean come from? And we need to be able to explain it. We probably will not have to explain all, but the question could ask us to perhaps explain three places where three reasons the Caribbean is a culturally diverse region, right? So one is indigenous people, right? So the first set of peoples who inhabited, that's what we mean by indigenous, right? The Caribbean. Okay, and they had their own language. But first of all, in some places they still exist, so communities still exist. So I shouldn't say had, I should say have. Right? And how do they influence Caribbean today? So they influence it through language. I'll give you some easy examples to remember. So you know the word hammock, that comes from indigenous languages. Barbecue, the method of cooking, and the word comes from the indigenous languages, barbacoa, right? And place names, some place names, and they will vary from country to country, obviously, right? But there will be place names in each country that were named by the first peoples who lived there. All right, so the first source of cultural diversity in the Caribbean is the indigenous people, the people who were here first. The next source is European, the next source, sorry, is European colonization. So Spain, France, England. Am I forgetting anybody? Possibly the Dutch, not the Portuguese, because they didn't come to this part of the Caribbean, right? Most they made it to was Brazil because of how the Pope drew the line on the map to say Portugal, this is your piece of the world, and Spain, this is your piece of the world, right? So Spain, France, England. Now, in social studies, we deal with the English-speaking Caribbean. We already deal with the French-speaking Caribbean or the Dutch or even the Spanish-speaking Caribbean. We are mostly considering English-speaking Caribbean. However, even the English-speaking Caribbean at some point had to contend with Spain and France, even though the majority of the time they were contending with England, right? So European colonization, right? So people who came in search of wealth and opportunities. All right. Then we had African enslavement. So we had people from Africa who were brought forcibly in order to work on sugarcane plantations, right? And then once emancipation occurred, did not return, the majority did not return to Africa, right? All right. So after emancipation, the next scheme that the Europeans tried and the next thing that brought different peoples to the Caribbean was indentureship. And so this brought a variety of people. It brought the Chinese, It brought more Europeans from different parts of Europe. It brought Indians. It brought a small additional number of Africans as well, of people from Africa, right? But a small number. So I'm talking about in the hundreds, so I'm not gonna put it, right? So Chinese, more Europeans, Indians came to try to fill or to try to work these sugarcane plantations and make them profitable again, right? And again, when contracts were done, people did not necessarily return. People didn't return, and as well as sometimes the British didn't return them. They promised to return them, but didn't. Right? Okay, other migrant communities. So that's pretty open, that's pretty vague. So other migrant communities could be from other parts of the Caribbean. It could be from Spanish-speaking countries. It could be, and there's a small number of Europeans and Americans who choose to settle permanently in the Caribbean for whatever reason, right? All right, and then also we're diverse because of global influences and cultural imperialism through media and travel. So here we're not talking about people necessarily who came and brought their practices, but like when we talked about Taylor Swift and K-pop and K-dramas, right? So in the Caribbean, we adopt practices and elements of culture due to exposure. So you see it, you experience it, you feel it, you get it by travel. So you travel somewhere first and you experience it, or by media, right? Other than that, online, on YouTube, on the TV, some other way, but through media, right? All right, if you have questions, tell me, right? But when we talk about the Caribbean being culturally diverse, meaning so many different cultural practices, sources, beliefs, ideas exist in this one small population of 6 million in one small region. These are the reasons why, right? And we see it in food, in clothes that we have the option to wear, in the products that we consume, meaning like the cultural products we consume, the TV shows we watch, the songs we listen to, etc. You kind of see the church in the background, you can see the family, right? All right. Next one, you can see a group of people dancing in costumes, right? So the first one is institutions and family. This next one could be like a cultural group. Sometimes people join a group to practice dance or play music or whatever. Here we have a singer. I can't remember what this picture is supposed to convey, but maybe it's music, maybe it's, what about this one? This one is definitely media, right? Your phone passes on culture. Here we have, what is this? What does this look like to you all? You have some young people with backpacks sitting. So probably a school or university. Yeah, school, right. And so now we come to the note, right? So when it comes to passing on culture, family, and that family could be parents, but it could be elders in the family, so like grandparents, right? And they teach you what to do, they model the behavior, they share their beliefs, right? So they are a major source of culture. The singer is artist. Okay, so if you were taking a note, you would have gotten ahead, yeah. All right. Cultural groups. Let me put all because some of you were noting before, right? So cultural groups now, they actually practice the culture. So this is like a dance group or even a musical group. Like sometimes there are traditional instruments that people who want to learn them, they will go to temple, they go to mosque, they go to church to learn them, right? So example, dance, example, musicians or music, right? People could go to church or temple or mosque to learn more about their religion, right? To learn about the religious text, to practice singing, religious songs. Um, but so that would be a cultural group, right? It would also be like an example of institutions because the church or the temple or the mosque, right? All right, so cultural groups, um, why things are done and how they are done. So, all right. Then we have artists, but we don't just mean the ones that paint, we mean the ones that sing and dance and play music and act, right? So they produce cultural items, dances, songs, music, theater, maybe plays, right? All right, then we have media as an agent that passes on culture, Caribbean culture. We have TV, we have internet, we have radio, right? They play music, they share performances, they have cultural programs. Okay, and then we have institutions, those long-standing places that have a physical location as well as they spread ideas and they have traditions associated with them. So we have schools, we have universities, churches, temples, mosques, and they spread cultural beliefs. So they tell people about the things that we believe. Sometimes they pass it on as morals. They say this is what we should do because this is the right thing, or they give a reason. And they uphold traditions. So they do things over and over. So examples are weddings, right? Worship ceremonies in schools. Um, a lot of schools start the day with some type of worship ceremony, right? Wearing uniforms. That's a tradition that's being upheld by schools, right? All right, if you have questions, let me know. Okay, as the recording is on, let me just remind us one more time that the link that I'm sending the link to access the recordings in the chat. So please save it somewhere. The only homework for today's class is to complete any notes you did not complete. And one other thing I would ask, let's try to be on time to start class, right? 11:30, 25 to, I start teaching at 25 to 12. So try and log in at 11:30, just so that if there's an issue, it might get resolved before that 25 to when we start, right? We should not be coming in 15, 20, 30 minutes late to class, right? You will miss work and then you might think you're going to back to recording. I hope that's what you think. But sometimes it's hard to find the time to do that, right? So please make an effort to be on time. Sometimes things come up, but if that is not the issue, please try to be on time, right? All right, so we talked about how culture is passed on from, so how did we learn to be Caribbean, basically, from when we came into the world to now. The next thing we're going to talk about is how that culture that is passed on gets changed. And I was using this example of children should be seen and not heard, and who do here will feel, to start a conversation about how disciplining children has changed over the years, right? All right, so let's talk about how culture changes. Oh, wait, no, first there's a genie. Would you like to make a wish? Here's this sad looking person, so probably I am not going to make this wish because he looks very sad. That can't be good. You bet your house and land that Brazil will beat Trinidad and Tobago in the 2026 World Cup with 8-1. What happened? Oh no! Trinidad beat Brazil. 8-1. Okay, this is clearly an alternate universe. And I think he's saying something like all his friends made the bet and he's the only one that lost because he didn't think we would win. So, all right. All right, here's our heading. Now I'm going to explain this process on 2 different slides. This slide and the next slide, right? So it might get to be a little repetitive, but it's necessary because the terms that they give us to learn can sometimes confuse us. All right, so how can culture be transformed is our heading. And the first one is through celebrations, right? So the first way, 1, through celebrations, right? We're speaking in general. Right? So when it comes to the example with the children is just an example that I thought we could all relate to. But it's generally, it's not just in families. It's a good question. So families, but also institutions and artists and all the other people we just looked, cultural groups, everybody that we just looked at, right? All right. So celebrations involve practices. People are doing things and actions, right? And over time, these change. Even if they are very close to the original, they change, they develop differences. Right? If you take an example of a recipe that your grandparents used to make, and then maybe your parents started making it, and then you start making it, it'll be 3 different things. Even if it's the same recipe in front of you, it will evolve over time. Right? So one way that culture could be transformed is through celebrations. That's one way. Because when you are celebrating, you are actually doing something, whether it's a specific ritual or specific practice. When somebody is getting married, there's specific music being played. But the music that's played today at weddings is different from the music that was played 20 years ago, right? Or 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, or 50 years ago. Why do, okay, all right. This process occurs when other aspects of other cultural aspects come into contact with it, right? So, all right, this is already set. So the second thing is through contact, right? So this process of change, of transformation, occurs when other cultural practices from other places, right, come into contact or come into experience, or we experience them with what exists, right? So your parents used to use evaporated milk or maybe regular milk to make macaroni pie, right? And then your grandparents used to use regular milk to make macaroni pie. Your parents started using evaporated milk because they were like, oh, we want a richer taste. You discovered something else, heavy cream, or maybe you discovered um, cream of mushroom soup, or maybe you discovered uh, a heart condition runs in your family, so you stop eating macaroni pie. And there's some kind of change that goes as a joke, that goes on from generation to generation because you've seen other recipes, you've become more aware of healthy actions and healthy diets, and you make changes accordingly, right? Right, and then the third thing is through commercialization. right? When certain aspects of a culture become more popular than others because the market wants it, people want it. Who is the most popular musical artist in your country that is producing local or regional music? Who fits that bill? Yeah, Marshall Montano for Trinidad for sure, right? Not Cass, not anybody else. It's Marshall Montano. No, y'all are welcome to disagree, right? If it were 20, 30 years ago, was it still Marshall Montano? 40 years ago. No, he's 40. Is he 40 something? Or is he 50? He's 40 something. He's 30 something, late 30s. So 20, let me say 20 years ago. It was somebody else. But as he's gotten older and as his music has taken on more of a commercial appeal, people that want to hear his music. They want to hear his songs at a fete. They want to jump up to his songs when they cross on the stage. Um, they're willing to put their money to experiences where they will hear his music, right? Um, so the aspect of the culture has become more popular. He's had collaborations with international artists because more people want to hear what he has to perform. More people want to see him perform, want to hear him sing, right? All right, so we have these three things noted. So we have that culture is transformed through celebrations. True, we could even have said through practice. Celebrations implies like happy practices, but sad practices too change over time. Um, like if funerals, for example, have evolved from what they used to be, right? When I was a child, it was unheard of for Christians to be cremated. I mean, just in my experience, right? I'm just saying. But as time has gone on, it has become a more popular method to put someone to rest, right? Um, I try to think of other examples, not as morbid, but I can't right now. All right, second thing, through contact with other cultures, right? And then third thing, through commercialization, right? All right, so let's see what is on our next slide. Or last 10 seconds. If you need more time, let me know, right? Okay. Right. This slide sort of has a lot of information on it that I couldn't get to transition. So this is the same idea, but with a few more complicated terms, right? So you could take notes from this slide. You don't have to write on everything word for word. Just whatever you feel would add to your understanding. Make sure you know the terms as well, right? So does culture stay the same? Why or why not? That's the same as saying, does culture transform, right? What are the things that causes culture to transform? So culture changes, it does not stay the same. We have to remember that, right? And we could think back up to the example with the kids now. Um, the first example was children should be seen and not heard. So children should not be talking a lot when they are around adults. So the adults talk and the kids to just sit there quietly and stare at their fingers or their lap or feet or whatever, right? And who do here will feel. The next idea here to do with disciplining children is if you don't do what I say, I will hit you. Who do here will feel, right? This was the thinking, let's say 40, 50 years ago. This was perfectly acceptable in society, in culture, right? But would we say this is acceptable today? Would we beat children today? You don't want to answer. I think that this is less acceptable today, right? The pain that people feel is more like a consequence, like something gets taken away, or they lose video privileges, or they lose some kind of privilege, or they don't get an allowance or something like that. The feel is not a physical attack, right? And children should be seen and not heard. There's more space in society now for children to be heard, to speak. We want kids to speak up, whereas before we wanted them to be silent, right? All right. It changes through practice. So people take part in customs, festivals, celebrations, and we change them. We add to them, we subtract from them, we alter them, we change them. Okay, so earlier I gave you the example of the 40 days that was incorporated into part of the mourning process. Mourning as in MOURNING, into Presbyterian religion, according to the pastor. I don't know. I didn't fact check him, so he could. It's just an example, right? Adding in an observance on the 40th night is an addition. Subtracting. So let's say the practice of putting flowers on a coffin reduces, or wreaths for a burial service isn't done as much anymore. That's subtracting. Altering, so perhaps prayers are said differently, hymns are sung differently. I have here, I've written over it, but think of Christmas. What has been added to Christmas? What has been taken away from Christmas? What has altered in relation to Christmas, right? In your family. And you could see some examples. Through people mixing. Now, this is an important term that I need to make sure you'll see and write down and remember, right? Creolization. So the process of creolization, the idea is that it's an idea that somebody came up with, Kamal Brathwaite, a long time ago. And the idea was that people in the Caribbean took cultural practices that were forced upon us, right? And made them into something new. So if you are forced to eat a certain sort of food, to perform certain tasks, to wear certain clothes on a daily basis, that can be very debilitating. Human beings like to have choice. We like to have freedom. We also like structure and those things, but we don't like to feel oppressed, right? Nor should we. Nor should anybody. But if you are in a situation where you don't have power, you don't have guns, you don't have physical strength, you don't have the numbers, then another strategy is you take what is forced upon you, the religion that is forced upon you, for example, and you create a new religion from it. That is yours. It's different from the original, and that is what creolization is. You think of language as another example. You're forced to speak English because you're separated from the other people who speak your language. So you take the English and you make it into your own version of English, something that you understand and your compatriots understand, but is different from the original version of English, right? So creolization, a simpler way to define this term, is the idea of people and cultural practices mixing. right? So Creole practice, Creolization is cultural practices mixing to create something new, right? All right, and the other major thing that influences cultural transformation, that changes culture, has to do with money, what people will spend their money on. So elements of culture could die out because people will not spend money on it. So you might think about traditional music that's played around carnival time, right? So for instance, much less popular now, at least in Trinidad, is extempo and um well, to a lesser extent calypso, but I'll just leave extempo. This is where people sing songs on the spot, meant to lightly insult or critique the person they're singing against, or social situations, cultural situations in the news. Right? All right, so elements of it could out people. So people will not pay money to go see extempo performed as much before Carnival, right? It used to be one of the festivities leading up to Carnival. So, but there's just less of a crowd, right? All right, others become dominant. So, everybody wants it. Everybody wants to be there. Everybody is willing to spend money on it. So dominance, or they change in order to meet what the market wants, right? Um, so cultural products change to meet what the market wants. Church's chicken. Do you all have a Church's chicken close to where you are? When the franchise first came to the Caribbean, the recipe had to be changed to suit a Caribbean palate. Probably KFC too, but they didn't talk about it as much, right? They had to make it spicier and tastier. So an example of how a the cultural practice of making fried chicken to sell to people, the recipe attached to it changes to meet the desires of the market, right? All right. Right. So we have three. We understand that culture changes, it does not stay the same. And why does it change? It changes because of practice. The key word there is practice. It changes because of creolization. Keyword there is creolization. And it changes because of commercialization or because of commercial activities, right? Okay, anybody has a question, anything they want to ask? Please say if you do, right? We will wrap up here in a minute. I have on the bottom here, consider popular snacks. How have snacks changed for you since 10 years ago? What's your favorite snack to eat? How has the packaging changed? I think for us, a lot of the packaging, like there's a bigger option now. The packs used to be a lot smaller, but now the sizes are the individual serving sizes, not the big snack bag size, but cheesies and corn curls, those bags are a lot bigger. They still have the small ones, and they might sell like 10 of the small ones in one big clear bag. Like if you're stuffing a party bag or if it's for a small child. But the regular size corn curls is pretty big. And the regular size cheesies is pretty big. And this conversation is making me want to go eat some. All right. So, today, what did we talk about? We spent the class talking about culture in the Caribbean, what it is, how it came to be, what it was, what it is, right? How it can be transformed, who is transforming it. Next week, we have to look at how Caribbean culture has impacted the world, and then we will switch to family, right? All right, so I hope you all had a good first class. Please save the link to access the recording. So we'll need about 24 hours to get to it. Sorry, didn't mean to hide that. Right, once you all are done, if you have no questions, you're free to go enjoy the rest of your Sunday, right?